The sharp crack of the whip echoed across the Oklahoma plains, but Vivian Dawson no longer flinched. After 3 years of marriage to Silas Thornton, the pain had become as familiar as the changing seasons. Her once vibrant spirit had dimmed like a lantern running out of oil, but in her heart, a flicker of defiance still burned. The chains binding her wrists to the bedpost had rubbed her skin raw, a physical manifestation of the bondage she'd endured since saying, "I do," to the wealthiest rancher in Ardmore. It was 1879, and Vivian was 22 years old, her youth already slipping away in the grand but prison-like homestead 5 miles outside town. She stared at the ceiling of the master bedroom, the ornate moldings a stark contrast to the ugliness that transpired beneath them. As Silas stormed out to attend to business in town, Vivian knew she had until sunset to free herself or surrender to another night of torment. "You'll learn to be a proper wife eventually," Silas had sneered before leaving, his breath hot with whiskey despite the early hour. "Maybe a few hours to think on your disobedience will finally teach you." Her crime had been simple. She'd spoken to Jeremy Collins, the general store owner, for too long while collecting supplies. In Silas's twisted mind, any interaction with another man was cause for punishment. Vivian tugged at the chains, wincing as they bit deeper into her already wounded flesh. Blood trickled down her forearms, staining the fine linen sheets that Silas insisted on importing from back east. He liked his luxuries, did Silas Thornton. He liked his wife to look perfect too, a beautiful ornament to show off at church on Sundays. Nobody in Ardmore suspected what happened behind closed doors. The sun climbed higher in the sky, sending shafts of light through the curtains. Vivian had long ago learned that crying wouldn't help, but still, tears stung her eyes. She thought of her parents, both gone now, who'd encouraged the match. Silas had seemed such a catch, handsome, successful, charming when he wanted to be. How could they have known he wore a mask that slipped away once the marriage certificate was signed? A sound outside pulled her from her dark thoughts, hoofbeats approaching, too early for Silas to return. Vivian's heart quickened. Visitors were rare, Silas made sure of that. He claimed to value privacy, but in truth, he was isolating her, cutting her off from anyone who might notice her bruises or the hollow look in her eyes. The hoofbeats stopped, followed by footsteps on the porch. A knock at the door went unanswered. Martha, their housekeeper, only came on Wednesdays, and this was Monday. "Hello, anyone home?" A deep voice called out. Vivian froze. Part of her wanted to call for help, but fear paralyzed her. Silas would kill her if she brought someone into their personal matters. The front door creaked open. Silas often left it unlocked, confident in his reputation as someone not to be crossed. "Sorry to intrude, but your horse out front looks injured. Just wanted to check if everything's all right." The footsteps grew closer, moving through the house. Vivian's breathing quickened as she heard the stranger climb the stairs. She tried to sit up to appear less vulnerable, but the chains restricted her movement. The bedroom door swung open, and Vivian found herself staring into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. The man stood tall in the doorway, a stranger in worn trail clothes, his hat clutched in his hands. His expression shifted from concern to shock, then to something harder, colder. "Madam," he said quietly, his gaze taking in the chains, the blood, her tear-stained face. "Please," Vivian whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. "He'll be back by sunset." The stranger's jaw tightened. He crossed the room in 3 strides, examining the chains that held her captive. "The name's Fletcher Reed," he said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. "And I don't believe this is how a husband should treat his wife." Vivian noticed the star pinned to his vest, not local law, but a Texas Ranger, far from his usual territory. He has the key, she said, hope and fear battling within her. Fletcher looked around the room, then pulled a small leather case from his pocket. Don't need one, he replied, selecting a slim metal tool. Within minutes, he'd picked the locks on both cuffs. When her hands were free, Vivian rubbed her raw wrists, the pain both sharp and relieving. Thank you, she breathed, but you need to go. If Silas finds you here, I'm not leaving you with him, Fletcher interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. He shrugged off his duster and draped it around her shoulders. Can you walk? Vivian nodded, though her legs were shaky as she stood. I've nowhere to go, she admitted. He owns half the businesses in town. No one will cross him. Let me worry about that, Fletcher said. He glanced around the lavish bedroom with distaste. Grab anything you need. We're leaving. You don't understand. He'll hunt me down. He's done it before. The memory of her last escape attempt made Vivian shudder. She'd made it 10 miles before Silas and his men found her. The punishment had been severe. Fletcher's expression darkened. Not this time. He guided her to the dresser. Pack light, just essentials. As Vivian gathered a few belongings, a photograph of her parents, a hairbrush, a change of clothes, she found herself wondering about this stranger who'd walked into her nightmare. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Fletcher's eyes met hers in the mirror. Some things don't need explanation, madam. Some wrongs just need righting. They moved downstairs, Vivian growing stronger with each step away from that bedroom. In the kitchen, Fletcher found some bread and cheese, wrapping them in a cloth. When did you last eat? Yesterday morning, Vivian admitted, accepting the canteen he offered her. A sound from outside froze them, both horses approaching. Multiple riders. Is there a back way out? Fletcher asked, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Vivian nodded, leading him through the kitchen to a rear door. They slipped outside into the bright afternoon sun, but it was too late. Silas and 3 of his men were already dismounting in the front yard, and one spotted them immediately. Boss, she's out, the man called. Silas turned, his face contorting with rage when he saw Vivian standing beside a stranger. Who the hell are you? He demanded, stalking toward them. Fletcher stepped forward, positioning himself between Vivian and her husband. Texas Ranger, he said simply. Just passing through and noticed something wasn't right. Silas laughed, but his eyes remained cold. This is a private matter between me and my wife. You do well to ride on, Ranger. Not happening. Fletcher's stance was relaxed but alert. The lady's coming with me. The lady, Silas spat, is my wife. And what happens between a man and his wife is his business. The tension in the air was palpable. Vivian could see Silas's men spreading out, hands hovering near their weapons. 3 against 1, and Silas himself was known as a quick draw. Not when it involves chains and blood, Fletcher replied evenly. Mrs. Thornton, please go to my horse, the chestnut, gelding by your fence. Vivian hesitated, paralyzed by fear of what Silas would do. Her husband's face was turning purple with rage. You touch my property again and I'll see you hang, Silas threatened. She's not property, Fletcher said, his voice deadly quiet. Now back off and let the lady leave. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then Silas made his move, reaching for his gun. Fletcher was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. The shot hit Silas in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee. Go, Fletcher urged Vivian, backing away as Silas's men drew their weapons. Vivian ran for Fletcher's horse, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. Behind her, gunshots echoed across the yard. She reached the chestnut gelding and pulled herself into the saddle, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the reins. More shots rang out, and then Fletcher was running toward her, blood staining his shirt sleeve. He vaulted up behind her on the horse, his arm circling her waist as he took the reins. "Hold on tight," he said in her ear, and then they were galloping away from the house, away from Silas and his men. Vivian glanced back to see two of Silas's men on the ground, wounded or dead. She couldn't tell, and Silas himself standing in the yard, his face twisted with hatred as he shouted something lost to the wind. The third man was mounting up, clearly intending to give chase. They rode hard across the open plains, Fletcher's arm steady around Vivian, his body a shield at her back. When they reached a copse of trees following a small creek, he guided the horse into the water, riding downstream to confuse their trail. "He won't stop looking for me," Vivian said once they'd slowed to a walk, her voice shaking. "Silas doesn't let go of what he considers his." Fletcher's voice was grim behind her. "Then we'll need to make sure he has other things to worry about." As dusk approached, they made camp in a sheltered ravine far from any trail. Fletcher built a small fire and tended to Vivian's wounded wrists, cleaning them gently with water from the creek before applying salve from his saddlebags. "These will heal," he said softly, "but they'll leave scars." Vivian looked at her wrists, the angry red welts stark against her pale skin. "I've got plenty of those already, some you just can't see." Fletcher's eyes met hers, understanding in their depths. "I know something about those too." He finished bandaging her wrists and moved to check on their horse. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Vivian studied her rescuer. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with features weathered by sun and wind. His movements were efficient, deliberate, those of a man accustomed to fending for himself. "You said you're a Texas Ranger," she ventured. "You're a long way from Texas." Fletcher glanced up from where he was preparing coffee in a small pot. "Following a fugitive. Lost his trail near Fort Smith. Decided to cut through Oklahoma territory on my way back." He handed her a cup of the strong brew. "Seems like Providence now." Vivian wrapped her fingers around the warm metal, savoring both the heat and the freedom to move her hands. "What happens next?" Fletcher settled opposite her, the fire between them casting flickering shadows across his face. "We need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere Thornton can't reach you." "There's no such place," Vivian said quietly. "Not around here. He has connections everywhere in the territory. Then we go further. I know people in Texas who could help you start fresh." The thought of starting over, of being truly free, was almost too much to hope for. "What about Silas? He'll never divorce me. In his mind, I belong to him until death." Something shifted in Fletcher's expression, a hardening in his eyes. "Some men forfeit their rights when they treat others as less than human." He paused, studying her. "Did you love him once?" Vivian stared into the flames, memories washing over her. "I thought I did. He was charming, attentive. My parents died in a fever epidemic when I was 18. Silas stepped in, helped with funeral arrangements, offered security when I had none." Her voice grew bitter. "The real Silas didn't emerge until after the wedding. By then it was too late." "It's not too late now," Fletcher said firmly. They fell silent, the crackling fire and distant coyote calls the only sounds in the vast Oklahoma night. Vivian felt strangely at peace despite everything, as if she'd been holding her breath for 3 years and could finally exhale. As the fire burned low, Fletcher set up a bedroll for her. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." "Thank you," Vivian whispered, the words inadequate for what he'd done for her. "Not just for the rescue, for treating me like a person." Something flashed in his eyes, sorrow perhaps, or understanding. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we put more distance between you and Ardmore." Vivian settled onto the bedroll, pulling the blanket around her. For the first time in years, she drifted to sleep without fear of what the night might bring. Fletcher watched her sleep, her face peaceful in the dying firelight. He'd seen many things in his years as a ranger, but the sight of Vivian chained and bleeding had awakened a fury in him he'd rarely experienced. He checked his pocket watch. Nearly midnight. They'd need to move at first light. Thornton struck him as the type who wouldn't let go easily, especially after being shot and humiliated. Fletcher had recognized the look in Thornton's eyes, pure malevolence. He'd seen it before in men who viewed others as possessions to be controlled rather than human beings to be respected. Such men were dangerous, and Thornton had resources that made him more dangerous still. As the night deepened, Fletcher planned their route. They'd need supplies, but stopping in any town near Ardmore was risky. He had friends in Fort Worth who could help, but that was several days' ride, and they'd need to stay ahead of any pursuit. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong. Vivian woke to find Fletcher already breaking camp, his movements quiet and efficient. "I was thinking," she said as she rolled up her bedding, "there's a small trading post about 20 miles east of here. The owner, Mr. Jenkins, never much liked Silas. He might help us." Fletcher considered this. "We need supplies. Would Jenkins keep quiet if Thornton's men came asking?" Vivian nodded. "Silas tried to force him to sell his land a few years back. Jenkins refused. They've been at odds ever since." "It's worth the risk, then. We'll head there, but keep a sharp eye out for trouble." They rode double again, Vivian more comfortable now in Fletcher's presence. As they traveled, she felt a strange sensation building within her hope, something she'd almost forgotten. "Tell me about Texas," she said, partly to distract herself from the pain in her wrists, partly out of genuine curiosity. Fletcher described the vast ranges, the cattle drives, the growing towns and changing landscape. "It's not perfect, but there's still frontier enough for a person to disappear if they want to." "Disappearing sounds wonderful right about now," Vivian admitted. They reached Jenkins' trading post by mid-afternoon, approaching cautiously. The small cluster of buildings sat at a crossroads, a watering stop for travelers heading east or west. "Let me do the talking," Fletcher said as they dismounted. "Stay close." The trading post was quiet, just a few horses hitched outside and an old dog sleeping on the porch. Inside, the store smelled of leather, coffee, and tobacco. A gray-haired man looked up from behind the counter, his eyes widening when he recognized Vivian. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, then noticed her bandaged wrists and Fletcher standing protectively beside her. Understanding dawned on his weathered face. "Trouble at home, I take it, Mr. Jenkins," Vivian began. "This is Fletcher Reed. He's helping me get away from Silas." The old man nodded slowly. "About time somebody did." He extended a hand to Fletcher. "Jacob Jenkins, no friend of Thornton's, as I'm sure the lady told you." Fletcher shook his hand. "We need supplies and information. Has anyone been through asking about us?" Jenkins shook his head. "Not yet, but word travels fast out here." He leaned closer. "Heard there was some shooting out at the Thornton place yesterday. That you're doing?" "Self-defense," Fletcher replied simply. "Well, I won't shed any tears if you put a bullet in that bastard." Jenkins looked at Vivian sympathetically. Always suspected things weren't right there. Seen too many bruises poorly hidden under high collars. Vivian felt her cheeks flush with shame, but Jenkins quickly continued. "No blame to you, Mrs. Thornton. That man's got half the county terrified." While Fletcher gathered supplies, Jenkins pulled Vivian aside. "I've got something for you," he said, disappearing into a back room. He returned with a small wooden box. "Your mother left this with me before she passed. Asked me to keep it safe, said someday you might need it." Confused, Vivian opened the box to find a small velvet pouch. Inside were several gold coins and a folded note in her mother's handwriting. "For when the path grows dark, my darling, find your own light." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes. "She knew," she whispered. "Somehow she knew I'd need to escape." Jenkins nodded. Your mother was a wise woman. She saw something in Thornton that worried her, even when everyone else was impressed by his charm. He patted Vivian's hand. Take it. It's not much, but it might help you start fresh somewhere. Fletcher returned with their supplies. We should move on, he said, his expression tense. Don't want to bring trouble to your door, Jenkins. The older man waved away his concern. I can handle Thornton and his boys. He moved behind the counter and pulled out a shotgun. This tends to even the odds. As Fletcher paid for their supplies, Jenkins leaned close. Head southeast. There's an old line shack about 15 miles from here, near Buzzard Creek. Good place to hole up for a night, not many know about it. Fletcher nodded gratefully. We're in your debt. Just get her somewhere safe, Jenkins replied, his eyes on Vivian. That'll be payment enough. They left the trading post with renewed purpose, now better equipped for their journey. Fletcher had acquired a second horse, an aging mare but still strong enough to carry Vivian, allowing them to travel faster. As they rode, Fletcher kept glancing behind them, a frown creasing his brow. What's wrong? Vivian asked, noticing his unease. Something doesn't feel right, he admitted. We've seen no sign of pursuit, which seems strange given Thornton's character. Vivian shared his concern. Silas isn't one to give up easily, especially after being humiliated. The answer came sooner than either expected. As they crested a small rise, Fletcher suddenly reined in his horse, his hand moving to his gun. What is it? Vivian asked, alarmed. Fletcher pointed to a thin column of smoke rising in the distance exactly where Jenkins had said the line shack should be. Could be innocent travelers, Vivian suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. Could be, Fletcher agreed, but I don't believe in that kind of coincidence. He studied the terrain carefully. We'll circle wide, approach from the south. If it's Thornton's men, we need to know how many we're dealing with. They left the trail, cutting through dense brush that slowed their progress but provided cover. As they drew closer to the line shack, Fletcher motioned for Vivian to stay with the horses while he crept forward to investigate. Be careful, she whispered, surprising herself with how much she already cared for this man's safety. Fletcher moved silently through the underbrush until he had a clear view of the small cabin. His suspicions were confirmed. 4 horses were hitched outside, and he recognized 2 of the men lounging near the fire as Thornton's hired guns from the day before. Making his way back to Vivian, Fletcher outlined what he'd seen. They've anticipated our route. Jenkins must have mentioned this place to someone else who passed the information to Thornton. Or they tortured it out of him, Vivian said grimly. What do we do now? Fletcher checked his ammunition. We change direction, push through the night. There's a river about 10 miles west. We'll cross it and head south toward Texas. The sun was beginning to set as they turned their horses westward, keeping to the cover of trees and ravines where possible. The landscape grew increasingly rugged, making travel slower but offering better hiding places. Night had fallen by the time they reached the river, its waters running high and fast from recent rains. Fletcher dismounted to check the depth at the crossing. It's risky, he admitted when he returned, but we don't have much choice. We'll cross together, my horse first since he's stronger. Vivian nodded, her fear of the rushing water overshadowed by her greater fear of returning to Silas's chains. They urged their horses into the water, the animals initially balking at the current before moving forward. The crossing was treacherous, the water reaching the horses' flanks at midpoint. Vivian's mare struggled against the current, snorting with fear as her footing slipped on the riverbed stones. Easy, Vivian soothed, leaning forward to stroke the animal's neck. We're almost there. They were 3/4 across when disaster struck. The mare stepped into a deeper section and panicked, rearing up in the water. Vivian fought to stay mounted, but the sudden motion combined with the current tore her from the saddle. She plunged into the icy water, the current immediately dragging her downstream. "Vivian!" Fletcher's shout seemed distant as she struggled to keep her head above water. The river tossed her like a rag doll, slamming her against rocks and submerging her repeatedly. Through her panic, she heard hoofbeats thundering along the riverbank and glimpsed Fletcher galloping parallel to her, his face tight with determination. The river bent sharply ahead, and Fletcher cut across the neck of land, dismounting and wading into the shallower water just before the bend. As Vivian was swept around the curve, his arm shot out and caught her, dragging her against the current toward the shore. They collapsed on the muddy bank, both gasping for breath. "Are you hurt?" Fletcher demanded, his hands moving quickly over her arms and legs, checking for injuries. "I don't think so," Vivian managed between chattering teeth. "Just cold. So cold." Fletcher helped her to her feet, supporting her as they made their way to where his horse waited. The mare was nowhere in sight, likely still running in panic after throwing her rider. "We've lost half our supplies," Fletcher said grimly, helping Vivian onto his horse before mounting behind her. "And you're soaked through. We need to find shelter and get you warm before exposure sets in." He wrapped his duster around her and urged his horse away from the river, heading for a line of bluffs where they might find a cave or overhang for the night. Vivian leaned back against him, drawing warmth from his solid presence as her body trembled uncontrollably. They found shelter in a shallow cave, barely more than an indentation in the rock face but enough to block the wind. Fletcher quickly gathered wood for a fire, his movements urgent as he noted Vivian's blue-tinged lips and violent shivering. Once the fire was blazing, he pulled the remaining blanket from his saddlebag. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said practically. "I'll turn my back." Vivian didn't argue, her fingers clumsy with cold as she struggled with the buttons on her sodden dress. Fletcher kept his back to her, feeding the fire and arranging their meager supplies. "I'm decent," she finally said, the blanket wrapped tightly around her while her clothes steamed on rocks near the fire. Fletcher turned, relief crossing his features as he saw color returning to her face. He removed his wet jacket and boots, but kept the rest of his clothing on, settling opposite her by the fire. "That was too close," he said quietly. "I thought I'd lost you to that river." Something in his voice made Vivian look up sharply. The concern in his eyes went beyond that of a lawman for someone under his protection. It sent a flutter through her chest that had nothing to do with her near drowning. "Thank you for saving me," she said softly. "Again." Fletcher's smile was brief but warm. "Let's make it a habit. I don't need to continue." As they shared the jerky and hardtack that had survived the river crossing, Vivian found herself studying Fletcher's face in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he almost smiled. "How did you become a ranger?" she asked, partly out of curiosity, partly to distract herself from her growing awareness of him as a man rather than just her rescuer. Fletcher prodded the fire with a stick. "My father was one before me. Taught me everything he knew about tracking, shooting, reading sign. When he was killed by cattle rustlers, joining up seemed the natural path." "I'm sorry about your father," Vivian said sincerely. Fletcher nodded his acknowledgement. "It was 10 years ago now. I've made peace with it, though I still miss his counsel sometimes." He looked up at her. "What about you? Before Thornton, what was your life like?" Vivian wrapped the blanket more tightly around herself. "Simple, I suppose. My father was the doctor in a small town near Fort Smith. My mother taught school. They wanted me to continue my education, perhaps become a teacher myself." She smiled sadly. "After they died, those dreams seemed to fade away. Silas offered security, a place in society. I was young and afraid of being alone. And now I know there are worse things than being alone." She stared into the flames. "If I get through this, I'd like to teach someday, help children learn the way my mother did." "When you get through this," Fletcher corrected gently. "Not if." Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, understanding, connection, perhaps the first tentative threads of something deeper. Vivian looked away first, suddenly conscious of her state of undress beneath the blanket. "You should try to sleep," Fletcher said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Vivian protested. "You can't keep going without sleep." "I'll wake you in a few hours to take a turn," he conceded, though they both knew he probably wouldn't. Vivian lay down near the fire, the blanket tucked around her. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive as her mind replayed the events of the past 2 days. Her life had transformed completely in that short span, from captivity to freedom, from despair to cautious hope. And then there was Fletcher Reed, a man who'd risked his life for a stranger, who treated her with a respect she'd forgotten she deserved. She watched through half-closed eyes as he checked his weapons, his movements precise and practiced. What would happen when they reached Texas? Would he simply deliver her to safety and continue on with his duties? The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. Eventually, the warmth of the fire and the rhythm of Fletcher's quiet movements lulled her into sleep. Fletcher watched Vivian as she slept, her breathing deep and even. The firelight softened her features, highlighting cheekbones too pronounced from what he suspected was Thornton's systematic neglect. Even so, her beauty was undeniable, not just in her fine features and golden hair, but in the quiet strength she'd shown despite everything she'd endured. He found himself wondering about the circumstances that had led her to marry a man like Thornton. What promises had been made, what lies told? The fury he'd felt upon finding her chained like an animal had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened as he'd come to know her better over these past days. Moving quietly, Fletcher checked outside the cave. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the Oklahoma sky. No sign of pursuit, but Fletcher knew better than to relax his vigilance. Thornton's men were likely still searching, and they'd been in one place too long already. He returned to the fire, adding wood carefully to maintain the heat without creating too much smoke. As the night deepened, he allowed himself brief periods of rest, never fully sleeping but conserving energy for the days ahead. Dawn arrived with a golden glow across the plains. Fletcher roused Vivian gently, offering her the last of their coffee as she blinked awake. "Your clothes should be dry," he said, turning away to give her privacy. "We should move soon. The crossing might have thrown them off our trail, but I don't want to take chances." Vivian dressed quickly, grateful for the dry clothing despite its rumpled state. Her hair was a tangled mess, but she managed to braid it back with fingers still tender from the chains. "Which way now?" she asked as they packed up their few remaining supplies. "South," Fletcher replied. "We cross into Texas, head for Fort Worth. I have friends there who can help." They rode hard throughout the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and drink from streams they encountered. By late afternoon, they'd covered significant ground, the landscape gradually changing as they moved southward. "We'll reach the Red River tomorrow if we maintain this pace," Fletcher said as they made camp for the night in a stand of cottonwoods. "Once we're across, you'll be in Texas." "And Silas's reach?" Vivian asked, helping to gather wood for their fire. Fletcher's expression was guarded. "It depends how determined he is. Most men would cut their losses, but Thornton strikes me as the obsessive type." "He is," Vivian confirmed, her voice soft. "He once tracked a man for 3 months over a gambling debt. When he found him—" She trailed off, Shuddering at the memory of what Silas had done to the unfortunate debtor, Fletcher watched her face, reading the fear there. "Then we make sure he can't track us," he said firmly. "And if he does, he'll find me waiting." That night, they ate the last of their supplies, saving only a small portion for the morning. They would need to hunt or find a settlement soon to replenish their food. As they sat by the fire, Vivian found herself studying Fletcher again. Something had changed between them after the river incident, a shift in awareness, a deepening of their connection beyond rescuer and rescued. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After you've delivered me to safety in Fort Worth." Fletcher looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "I haven't thought that far ahead. Return to my duties, I suppose. Chasing other fugitives across other territories," Vivian mused, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "It's what I do," Fletcher replied, but he seemed unsettled by her question. "What about you, once you're safe?" Vivian stared into the flames. "Start over somehow. Find work, perhaps as a teacher's assistant or in a shop." She hesitated. "But I'll always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if today is the day Silas finally finds me." Fletcher moved to sit beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "It won't come to that, I promise." Their eyes met, and Vivian felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. For a moment she thought he might reach for her, and she realized with startling clarity that she wanted him to. Instead, he stood abruptly. "We should get some rest." "Long day tomorrow." Vivian nodded, both relieved and disappointed by his withdrawal. They were both vulnerable out here, emotions heightened by danger and proximity. Whatever she was beginning to feel for Fletcher Reed needed to be examined in the safety and rationality of civilization, not in the desperation of flight. Still, as she settled down to sleep, she couldn't help wondering if he felt the pull between them too. The next morning dawned overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain. They broke camp quickly, aware that wet weather would make tracking them more difficult, an advantage they desperately needed. They had ridden for perhaps 2 hours when Fletcher suddenly tensed, pulling his horse to a stop. "What is it?" Vivian asked, instantly alert to the danger in his posture. "Smoke," he said, pointing to the horizon where a thin, dark column rose against the gray sky. "That's no campfire." They altered course to investigate, approaching cautiously. As they drew closer, Vivian gasped in shock. Jenkins' trading post was ablaze, flames consuming the wooden structures as black smoke billowed upward. "Oh no," she whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "Mr. Jenkins." Fletcher's face was grim as he surveyed the scene from the safety of a small rise. No one was visible near the burning buildings, but that didn't mean they were alone. "This is Thornton's work," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Punishment for helping you." Vivian felt sick with guilt. "We have to see if Mr. Jenkins is all right." Fletcher hesitated, weighing the risk. "It could be a trap." "I can't leave without knowing," Vivian insisted. "He helped us at great personal risk." After a moment, Fletcher nodded. "We'll approach from downwind. If there's anyone waiting, the smoke will help conceal us." They dismounted and led the horse through a gully that brought them to the back of the trading post. The main building was fully engulfed, the heat intense, even at a distance. Fletcher drew his pistol and moved forward cautiously, Vivian close behind him. They found Jacob Jenkins behind the store, beaten badly but alive, propped against a water trough where he'd apparently dragged himself. "Jenkins," Fletcher said urgently, kneeling beside the older man. "Who did this?" Jenkins opened his one eye that wasn't swollen shut. "Thornton," he rasped. "And 6 men, looking for you too," he coughed painfully. "Didn't tell them nothing." Vivian knelt on his other side, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Jenkins. This is our fault." The old man managed a weak smile. "Made my choice, girl, no regrets." He gripped Fletcher's arm with surprising strength. "They're heading south. Think you crossed into Texas already?" Fletcher nodded grimly. "We need to get you help." Jenkins shook his head. "Too late for that. Go, get her somewhere safe." His breathing was becoming labored. "Thornton. He's gone mad. Said if he can't have her, no one will." A chill ran through Vivian at the words. Silas had always been possessive, but this was something else, something darker and more deadly. "We can't just leave you," she protested. Jenkins's gaze softened as he looked at her. "You already gave me something precious, Mrs. Thornton. Got to strike a blow against that bastard before the end." His voice weakened. "Now go while you still can." Fletcher checked the old man's pulse, then gently closed his eyes. "He's gone," he said quietly. Vivian wept silently, mourning this good man who died for helping her. Fletcher stood and surveyed the burning trading post, his expression hardening into resolve. "This ends now," he said, his voice cold with anger. "Thornton has crossed from being an abusive husband to a murderer." "What do you mean?" Vivian asked, wiping away her tears. "We're not running anymore." Fletcher helped her to her feet. "We're going to set a trap of our own." The plan Fletcher outlined was dangerous but offered their best chance of ending Silas's pursuit permanently. Instead of continuing south, they would circle back toward Ardmore, using the rain that had begun to fall to mask their trail. "Thornton thinks we're fleeing south," Fletcher explained as they rode through the strengthening downpour. "The last place he'll expect us to go is back toward his own territory." "What exactly are we going to do?" Vivian asked, rain plastering her hair to her face. Fletcher's eyes were hard as flint when he answered. "We're going to give him something more immediate to worry about than finding you." By nightfall, they had circled widely around the area where Thornton and his men were searching, making their way north through increasingly heavy rain. They found shelter in an abandoned barn, the roof leaking but still offering protection from the worst of the storm. As they dried themselves by a small fire, Fletcher laid out the details of his plan. "Thornton's wealth, his power, it all comes from his ranch. We take that away, he'll have neither the resources nor the men to keep hunting you." Understanding dawned on Vivian's face. "You mean to destroy the ranch?" Fletcher nodded. "Not just the buildings. His reputation, his standing in the community. By the time we're done, Silas Thornton will be the one running." "It's risky," Vivian said, though the idea of striking back at Silas after years of abuse held undeniable appeal. "His house will be guarded. Not heavily, not with him and most of his men out searching for us." Fletcher's confidence was reassuring. "We go in, free any workers still loyal to him, take what evidence we can find of his crimes, and then burn it all down." The boldness of the plan both terrified and exhilarated Vivian. "When?" "Tomorrow night. We'll need supplies first." Fletcher studied her face in the firelight. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no going back." Vivian thought of Jacob Jenkins, of her own scarred wrists, of all the women who might suffer under Silas's influence if he remained in power. "I'm sure. It's time Silas learned he doesn't own me or anyone else." The next day, they made their way carefully to a small settlement about 10 miles from the Thornton ranch. Fletcher left Vivian hidden in the trees while he went into the general store, returning with food, ammunition, and other supplies they would need. "Any news?" Vivian asked as they shared a meal of bread and dried beef. "Plenty," Fletcher replied grimly. "Thornton has put out a reward for information on your whereabouts, dead or alive." Vivian paled. "He's openly calling for my death. The story he's spreading is that you and I murdered Jenkins and burned down the trading post." Fletcher's disgust was evident. "He's positioned himself as the grieving husband whose wife was seduced away by a rogue lawman. And people believe him." Vivian asked, though she already knew the answer. Silas had spent years cultivating his public image as a respectable businessman and generous community leader. "Some do," Fletcher acknowledged. "But I also heard whispers. Not everyone is convinced. Martha, your former housekeeper, has apparently been talking about the bruises she used to tend, and the local preacher mentioned that he'd had concerns about your welfare for some time." A small flame of hope kindled in Vivian's heart. Perhaps not everyone had been fooled by Silas's mask of respectability after all. As dusk approached, they made their final preparations. Fletcher checked and rechecked his weapons. Vivian had changed into the clothing Fletcher had purchased: men's trousers and a shirt that allowed for easier movement than her dress. "Stay close to me once we're inside," Fletcher instructed. "If anything goes wrong, we meet back here and ride hard for Fort Worth. No waiting, no heroics." Vivian nodded, her stomach tight with a mixture of fear and determination. "I understand." They approached the Thornton ranch under cover of darkness, leaving their horse hidden in a stand of trees half a mile away. The house stood silhouetted against the night sky, a few windows glowing with lamplight. Fletcher led them on a circuitous route that brought them to the back of the property, near the stables. As he had predicted, security was minimal: just one man patrolling the grounds, easily avoided in the shadows. They slipped into the stables first. The young stable hand, Tommy, was still awake, tending to a mare with a new foal. He started in fear when they appeared, but recognition dawned when he saw Vivian. "Mrs. Thornton," he whispered, incredulous. "Hello, Tommy," Vivian said softly. "We need your help." The boy, no more than 16, looked between them nervously. "Mr. Thornton said you killed old Jenkins and ran off with an outlaw." "That's a lie," Fletcher said firmly. "Thornton killed Jenkins himself after torturing him for information about us." Tommy didn't seem surprised. "I figured it weren't true, what the boss said." "Not after seeing how he treated you, madam." He rubbed his arm unconsciously, and Vivian noticed the fading bruise there. "Has he hurt you too?" she asked gently. Tommy shrugged. "Just when he's in one of his moods. Nothing like what he did to you, madam." Fletcher placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else, but I need you to get the other workers away from the house." "Can you do that?" Tommy nodded eagerly. "Cook and Martha are the only ones in the main house tonight. Rest of the hands are out with the boss, looking for you too." "Get them out," Fletcher instructed. "Tell them to take whatever they can carry and get clear of the property." As Tommy went to warn the others, Fletcher and Vivian moved toward the main house. The back door was unlocked. Silas had never bothered much with security, confident in his reputation as someone not to be crossed. They entered the kitchen to find Martha already packing food into a large sack, evidently warned by Tommy. "Mrs. Thornton," she exclaimed, hurrying forward to embrace Vivian. "I knew you couldn't have done those terrible things Mr. Thornton's been saying." "We don't have much time, Martha," Vivian said, returning the embrace briefly. "Is Cook safe? He left an hour ago with Tommy." Martha's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I stayed to gather some things. Mr. Thornton has papers in his study, terrible things, records of bribes and threats. I've seen them when cleaning." Fletcher's interest sharpened. "Show us." Martha led them to Silas's study, a room Vivian had rarely been allowed to enter during her marriage. The older woman pointed to a large oak desk with a locked drawer. "In there. He always keeps it locked, but I've seen him hide the key behind that painting." Fletcher found the key exactly where Martha had indicated and opened the drawer. Inside were ledgers and correspondence that painted a damning picture of Silas Thornton's business practices: land seized through intimidation, bribes to local officials, even evidence of more violent crimes committed against those who opposed him. This is more than enough to ruin him legally, Fletcher said, gathering the papers. Martha, you should go now. Get as far from here as you can. The housekeeper nodded, patting Vivian's hand one last time. You take care, Mrs. Thornton. You deserve better than what life's given you so far. After Martha left, Vivian stood in the center of the study, memories washing over her of Silas's rage, his control, the gradual erosion of her spirit over 3 long years. There's one more thing I need to do, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. Fletcher watched as she crossed to a cabinet and opened it, revealing a small safe. The combination, he asked. My birthday, Vivian replied with bitter irony, the one date he never forgot. She turned the dial and the safe clicked open, revealing stacks of cash and several small velvet bags. His emergency funds, she explained. And these, she opened one of the bags, spilling glittering diamonds onto her palm, were my mother's jewelry that he claimed were stolen during a break-in. Fletcher's expression darkened. Take it all. It's rightfully yours anyway. Vivian gathered the money and jewels into a satchel she found in the study. Now I'm ready for the last step. They worked methodically, gathering lamp oil and kerosene from around the house, dousing the furniture and draperies in the main rooms. Vivian moved through the house one final time, saying goodbye to the prison that had held her for 3 years. In the master bedroom, she paused before the bedpost where her chains had hung. Fletcher found her there, staring at the metal links still attached to the heavy wooden frame. These were custom-made, she said quietly. He had them forged specially, told the blacksmith they were for restraining dangerous animals. A bitter laugh escaped her. I suppose in his mind that's what I was. Fletcher stepped close, his hand gentle on her shoulder. You're free now. He can never chain you again. Vivian turned to face him, something resolute hardening in her eyes. Then let's make sure of it. They finished their preparations and stood on the front porch of the grand house that had been both showcase and prison. Fletcher struck a match and handed it to Vivian. Your house, he said simply. Your choice. Vivian stared at the small flame dancing between her fingers. Then, with a decisive gesture, she tossed it onto the oil-soaked welcome mat. Fire bloomed instantly, racing up the doorframe and into the entrance hall. They stood watching as the flame spread rapidly through the house, consuming curtains and furniture, climbing up the grand staircase that had so often felt like a path to doom for Vivian. We should go, Fletcher said as the heat intensified. Someone will see the fire soon. They retreated to where they'd left their horse, the satchel of money and jewels secure along with the incriminating documents. Behind them, the Thornton house blazed against the night sky, a beacon that would be visible for miles. What now? Vivian asked as they mounted up. Now we ride for the territorial courthouse in Fort Smith, Fletcher replied. These documents need to reach the federal marshal there. After that, Texas, as we planned. They rode through the night, pushing hard to put distance between themselves and the burning ranch. By dawn, they had crossed into Arkansas territory, following the road that would eventually lead to Fort Smith. They stopped to rest in a small grove near a creek, both exhausted from the night's events and the long ride. As Vivian washed her face in the cool water, she caught her reflection, a woman she barely recognized, stronger and more determined than the broken creature who had been chained in that bedroom just days ago. Fletcher watched her from where he was tending to their horse. No regrets? He asked quietly. Vivian straightened, pushing her damp hair back from her face. None. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. She turned to face him. What about you? You've risked everything for someone you barely know, your career, your reputation. Fletcher stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Some things are worth the risk. The air between them seemed to still, the world narrowing to just the two of them standing beside the gurgling creek. Vivian found herself moving toward him, drawn by a force beyond conscious thought. "Fletcher," she whispered, his name a question and an invitation. His hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb gently tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I've known you less than a week," he said softly, "but I feel like I've been looking for you my whole life." When his lips met hers, Vivian felt something long dormant awaken within her desire. Yes, but also hope, the belief that happiness might still be possible even after everything she'd endured. The kiss deepened, his arms encircling her waist as she wound hers around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, foreheads pressed together as they processed this new dimension to their relationship. "I didn't plan for this," Fletcher admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "When I found you, I just wanted to get you to safety." "And now?" Vivian asked, suddenly vulnerable despite the strength she'd found. Fletcher's eyes held hers, sincere and unwavering. "Now I want more than that. If you'll have me." Before Vivian could respond, the sound of approaching riders shattered their moment of connection. Fletcher reacted instantly, drawing his gun as he positioned himself between Vivian and the potential threat. 6 riders appeared through the trees, and Vivian's heart nearly stopped as she recognized the lead figure, Silas Thornton, his face twisted with rage even at this distance. "Get to the horse," Fletcher ordered quietly. "Be ready to ride." "I'm not leaving you," Vivian protested. "This isn't a discussion." Fletcher's voice was firm but not unkind. "If this goes badly, you need to get those documents to Fort Smith. It's the only way to ensure Thornton faces justice, even if I don't make it." The riders drew closer, spreading out in a semicircle. Silas urged his horse forward, his eyes locked on Vivian with a hatred that chilled her to the bone. "Well, well," he called, his voice carrying across the clearing. The whore and her rescuer, caught at last. Fletcher's stance remained relaxed, but Vivian could sense the tension coiled within him, ready to explode into action if necessary. "That's close enough, Thornton." Silas ignored him, his focus entirely on Vivian. "Did you enjoy watching our home burn, dear wife? Did it give you pleasure to destroy everything I built?" "It was never a home," Vivian replied, finding courage in Fletcher's steady presence beside her. "It was a prison. And yes, I took great pleasure in burning it to the ground." Silas's face contorted with fury. "You ungrateful bitch. After everything I gave you, chains and bruises." Vivian interrupted, her voice stronger now. "Fear and pain. Those were your gifts, Silas, and I'm returning them now." Fletcher kept his attention on Thornton's men, who had spread out in a loose formation. "You're outnumbered, Ranger," one of them called. "Maybe," Fletcher acknowledged, "but Thornton will be the first to die if bullets start flying." "Are you boys willing to die for a man who burns down trading posts and murders old men?" Uncertainty flickered across several faces. Clearly, not all of Thornton's men were comfortable with how far things had gone. Silas noticed their hesitation and snarled, "I'm paying you good money to get my wife back and kill this meddling lawman. Anyone who can't follow orders can leave now without pay." None of the men moved, but their reluctance was evident. Fletcher pressed his advantage. "We have documents, Thornton. Records of your bribes, your threats, your land grabs. They're already on their way to the federal marshal." This wasn't true, but Fletcher gambled that Thornton wouldn't know that. A flicker of fear crossed Silas's face before he mastered it. "You're bluffing." Fletcher smiled coldly. "Try me. Those papers detail everything, including what you did to Jacob Jenkins." The mention of the murdered trader seemed to unnerve several of Thornton's men further. One of them, a younger man with a nervous expression, began to back his horse away. "Where are you going?" Silas demanded. "You didn't say nothing about killing old Jenkins," the the man replied. "I signed on to help find your wife, not for murder." Another man nodded in agreement. "This has gone too far, Thornton. I want no part of a hanging offense." Silas's control was visibly slipping as his support eroded. "She's my wife," he shouted. "I have the right. You have no rights over me anymore," Vivian interrupted, stepping forward to stand beside Fletcher. "Those days are over, Silas. Let us pass, and perhaps the judge will show leniency when these documents reach him." For a moment, it seemed the tension might break without violence. Then Silas, his face twisted with hatred, drew his pistol and fired directly at Vivian. Fletcher moved with lightning speed, shoving Vivian aside as he returned fire. His bullet struck Silas in the chest, throwing him backward off his horse. Chaos erupted as two of Thornton's men opened fire while the others fled. Fletcher pushed Vivian toward the cover of nearby rocks, trading shots with the remaining gunmen. One bullet grazed Fletcher's arm, tearing through his sleeve and drawing blood. He barely noticed, his focus entirely on protecting Vivian and eliminating the threat. When the gunfire finally ceased, 3 men lay dead in the clearing: Silas Thornton and 2 of his most loyal hands. The others had fled, unwilling to die for a cause that had become increasingly disturbing. Vivian emerged from cover, rushing to Fletcher's side to examine his wound. "You're hurt," she said, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind the injury. "Just a graze," Fletcher assured her, though he winced as she tightened the makeshift bandage. His eyes sought hers. "Are you all right?" Vivian nodded, her hands trembling slightly as reaction set in. She looked at Silas's body, feeling not triumph or even relief, but simply a profound weariness. "It's really over," she whispered. Fletcher followed her gaze. "Yes, he can't hurt you or anyone else ever again." They collected the horses left behind by the dead men, securing their weapons and supplies. Fletcher searched Silas's body, finding more cash and a watch Vivian recognized as having belonged to her father. "He told me it was lost," she said quietly, taking the timepiece and holding it against her heart. "Just one more lie." With the immediate danger past, they continued toward Fort Smith, riding more cautiously now but with the weight of pursuit lifted from their shoulders. They reached the territorial courthouse the following day, where Fletcher presented the documents to a federal marshal he knew from previous cases. "These paint a damning picture of corruption," the marshal said after reviewing the papers. "And with Thornton dead, there'll be others willing to come forward now that they don't fear his reprisals." "What about Mrs. Thornton?" Fletcher asked. "She needs protection and legal standing to begin a new life." The marshal, a grizzled man named Collins, studied Vivian thoughtfully. "Given the evidence of abuse and the circumstances surrounding Thornton's death, I see no reason to pursue any charges against Mrs. Thornton. As for legal matters, as Thornton's widow, she inherits his estate, less whatever the government seizes as proceeds of criminal activity." This news startled Vivian. "I don't want his money," she said firmly. "Maybe not," Collins replied, "but think of the good you could do with it. Restitution to those he wronged, perhaps." The idea appealed to Vivian. Using Silas's ill-gotten gains to heal some of the damage he had caused seemed fitting justice. With the legal matters addressed, Vivian and Fletcher found themselves at a crossroads, literally and figuratively, as they stood outside the courthouse. "What now?" Vivian asked, the future suddenly wide open before her. "You mentioned friends in Texas." Fletcher looked at her, his expression softening. "That offer still stands, but I'm beginning to think I might have reasons to stay in one place for a while." Vivian's heart quickened at his words. "What reasons would those be?" Fletcher took her hands in his touch gentle on her healing wrists. "I think you know, Vivian, what I feel for you. It's happened faster than I ever thought possible, but it's real, If you need time, I understand." After everything you've been through, Vivian interrupted him by rising on her tiptoes and pressing her lips to his, a brief but heartfelt kiss. "I've had 3 years of a life without love," she said softly. "I don't want to waste another day." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony in Fort Worth, with Fletcher's ranger colleagues and a few new friends in attendance. Vivian wore a simple blue dress rather than white, symbolizing her fresh start rather than a traditional bride's purity. As they exchanged vows, Fletcher carefully slipped a ring onto her finger, his thumb gently caressing the scars on her wrist, scars that were healing but would never completely fade. A reminder not of weakness, but of survival. "With this ring, I promise you freedom as well as commitment," he said, adding his own words to the traditional vows. "Your path is yours to choose always. I will walk beside you, not ahead or behind." Tears glistened in Vivian's eyes as she responded, "And I choose to walk with you, freely and with my whole heart." The small house they purchased on the outskirts of Fort Worth became a true home, a place of safety, laughter, and growing love. Fletcher resigned from the Rangers to take a position as sheriff in the growing town, his experience and integrity quickly earning him the community's respect. Vivian, meanwhile, found her own path forward. Using some of her inheritance, she established a small school for children who couldn't afford the town's regular education. She also set aside funds to help women escaping situations similar to what she had endured, providing them with resources and support to build new lives. On their first anniversary, Fletcher built her a surprise, a small greenhouse behind their home, filled with flowering plants and herbs. "You were like these plants," he told her as he showed her the finished structure. "Kept in darkness, but still fighting to grow. Now you have all the light you need to flourish." Vivian explored the greenhouse with wonder, stopping to inhale the scent of lavender and rosemary. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to embrace him. Later that night, as they lay together in their bed, a place of comfort and passion rather than fear, Vivian traced the scar on Fletcher's arm, a permanent reminder of the bullet he'd taken to save her life. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Stopping that day at the Thornton place?" "Your life would have been much simpler if you'd ridden on." Fletcher gathered her closer against him, his hand gently caressing the curve of her hip. "Simpler, maybe, but empty in all the ways that matter." He kissed her tenderly. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Vivian Reed." "Even with all the complications," she persisted, still sometimes amazed that someone could love her so completely. "Especially with the complications," Fletcher assured her. "They're part of our story. And it's a story I wouldn't trade for anything." 2 years after their wedding, Vivian gave birth to their son, Benjamin, named after Fletcher's father. As she watched her husband hold their child for the first time, his strong hands infinitely gentle with the tiny bundle, Vivian felt a completeness she'd once thought forever beyond her reach. The scars on her wrists had faded to thin white lines, visible only if you knew to look for them. Like the memories of her time with Silas, they would always be part of her but no longer defining her. They were simply reminders of where she had been, not limitations on where she could go. Life wasn't perfect. There were still days when shadows from the past crept into her dreams, moments when a certain tone of voice or unexpected touch could trigger memories better left buried. But Fletcher understood, his patience and unwavering support creating the safe harbor she needed to continue healing. In time, they added a daughter to their family, Grace, a fitting name for the gift she represented in their lives. Watching their children grow in an environment of love and respect was Vivian's greatest joy, a daily reminder of how far she had come from that bedroom with its chains and terror. On warm evenings, the Reed family often sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant hues. Fletcher would play his harmonica, a skill he'd picked up during long nights on the trail, while the children danced and Vivian sang songs her mother had taught her long ago. During one such evening, as the children played in the yard and Fletcher sat beside her on the swing he'd built, Vivian rested her head on his shoulder. "I was thinking about the day we met," she said quietly. "How everything changed in that one moment." Fletcher's arm tightened around her. "For both of us," he agreed. "I went looking for one fugitive and found something entirely different." "You found a woman in chains," Vivian murmured. "No," Fletcher corrected gently. "I found a woman with the courage to break free who just needed someone to help with the lock." He kissed the top of her head. "You saved yourself, Vivian. I just held the lantern while you found your way out of the dark." Vivian smiled, watching their children play in the fading light. Benjamin had his father's determined chin and sense of justice, already at 5 years old standing up for smaller children in town. 3-year-old Grace had inherited her mother's golden hair and quiet resilience. "I think we saved each other," she said finally, "and keep doing so every day." As darkness settled over their home, Fletcher lit the lamps that would guide their children back to the porch, the warm light spilling out to create pools of gold in the gathering dusk. Vivian watched him, this man who had broken her chains and helped her build a life she once couldn't have imagined, and felt the familiar surge of love that still surprised her with its intensity. Their eyes met across the porch, and the smile they shared held all the understanding of two people who had walked through fire together and emerged stronger for it. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them as they had everything else since that fateful day in Ardmore together, freely chosen, chains broken beyond repair.